Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really glad you're with us for the Monday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Good, bad, crazy martinis today. And Jim, let's start with the good. There's a lot of lefties on Twitter who would not agree that this is a good martini, but I think it's indisputably a good martini because over the weekend, the Israeli Defense Forces conducted a dramatic raid that rescued 4 Israeli hostages, ages 26, 22, 27, and 41. We'll talk a little bit about one of them in more detail in just a moment. The typical Palestinian / Hamas protagonists on Twitter are out there saying, oh, the civilian casualties here are completely unacceptable. Well, when are you going to start caring about civilian casualties? Well, maybe when Hamas does, probably. But about 210 people killed on the Palestinian side, allegedly, with hundreds more allegedly injured.
According to the Gaza Health Ministry, which I believe the initial figure had several more zeros in it. They actually said 14 billion civilians killed and 2 Hamas members. Now that is several times the population of Earth, which doesn't quite add up. And I want to point out that the Associated Press did their own analysis late last week and said, this doesn't add up. The proportion of men, women, and children is always pretty steady throughout all the history of all the wars forever. And yet, according to the Gaza Health Ministry numbers, it's wildly out of whack. It's statistically impossible. And then, of course, the AP totally repeated the Gaza Health Ministry figures immediately after this raid again. They learned nothing. They did not read their own analysis. They did not read their own statistics. Nope. So didn't mean to cut you off, Greg. I just felt
No. It's an excellent point. And of course, the Biden administration keeps parroting those numbers. So at that point, news organizations feel a little bit obligated to at least tell you what Hamas is saying about them. But Jim, are you still a civilian when you're holding the people hostage? Just because you're not technically in uniform, that's quite the distinction that you're trying to make that might not be a difference. So here's the testimony from one of the hostages rescued, and then her name is Noah Argamani. Quote, I was held at a wealthy family's home in Gaza. They kept telling me, you should thank God you're with us. There are far worse places. While I was there, they would open the door without knocking whenever they wanted me to clean the house. When I was rescued, a soldier opened the door and said, hello, Noah, this is the IDF. I thought he was joking, so I didn't move. Then he told me, I'm going to pick you up over my shoulder. Is that okay? And that's when I realized that it was actually happening. And so, Jim, between positioning weapon systems and weapon stockpiles and fighting forces in civilian populations, now we find out the civilians were actually holding Israelis and who knows who else hostage, as there are still all the Americans and other hostages still being held. Makes it harder and harder to make the distinction here. So the crocodile tears, not exactly compelling at this point.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, if your immediate reaction to 4 Israeli hostages rescued is to look for the bad news, to look for this, look for the dark lining to the silver cloud, I think it says a great deal about how you look at this issue. I think it says a great deal about how you look at life, maybe foreshadowing our third martini today. But look, this was fantastic. It was really the best news to come out of this conflict in a long, long time. And I don't want to completely foreshadow something that is currently in the editor's desk over at the Washington Post. But I think the entire mentality that at some point Hamas is going to give up these hostages, when they refuse to say how many hostages they have that are still alive, how many have died, the only time anyone gets any real good updates on them is when they release a hostage tape in which these people, in some cases, like the one that was released in April, the poor guy had his arm cut off. Hamas is not treating these hostages responsibly. It is not treating them in keeping with the laws of war. Sexual abuse apparently is rampant of all of the women hostages and other abuse of the male hostages. And we've sent CIA Director Burns to the Middle East almost like on a weekly basis. He's there trying to negotiate, talking to the Egyptians, talking to the Jordanians, talking to Arab allies. Can anybody put any pressure on Hamas? Hamas is not going to wake up one day and suddenly be reasonable. There is no day in which, the Biden administration, there's so many, concessions that Israel's made. Okay, now we're going to release them. The leaders of Hamas reportedly travel with some of these hostages around as human shields. That's what's in their minds. That's what's keeping these guys alive. So they're not going to give away all the hostages. There was one hostage release back in like November. And since then, it's been going around in circles. I don't give Jake Sullivan much credit at all. I recently had a chance to talk to my friend Stephen Moore at our event, and we're discussing the Biden administration's reaction. And after articulating his frustration, mostly discussing Russia and Ukraine, Stephen blurted out, "Why isn't Jake Sullivan working at Chipotle?" And I didn't have a good answer to that. But I'm going to say, Jake Sullivan, at least on the Sunday shows, was pointing out the reason these hostages are still being held is because of Hamas. The reason the negotiations for their release are going nowhere is because of Hamas. The Biden administration has put out the most grandiose, here we're going to have Middle East peace forever plan ever. I'm very skeptical of this plan. We discussed late last week where, one of the Arab leaders, I believe it was of the United Arab Emirates, had referred to the leadership of the Palestinians as Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, right? There is great skepticism in the Arab world. And the whole idea was like, by the Biden administration saying to the Arab world, well, after we get the Israelis out, you guys are going to come in and rebuild Gaza, right? You guys are willing to spend a good chunk of your fortunes to give the Palestinians, rebuild all the infrastructure, rebuild all the houses and homes and all that stuff. You guys are going to help out, right? And the response of the Arab world is like, we're not helping those guys. We don't trust those guys about as far as we can throw them. They're gonna. It's all gonna end up in Swiss bank accounts, and they're gonna end up living on the French Riviera. So again, I think the Biden administration has been really naive and really blind to the challenges here. I think it's reasonable based on this. The only way these hostages are getting out is through operations like this one. There is no reason to think that Hamas leaders are going to wake up tomorrow and say, oh, okay, now we'll let some of them go. It's not going to happen. So kudos to the Israelis. Anybody who doesn't like it can stick it. Hamas could end this fight tomorrow. If they could end this fight today. And why are we in this mess? Because Hamas won't release the hostages. You leave Israel no choice. When you launch, hostage rescue operations like this, you're going to have casualties. Some of them will be civilians, but as you laid out there, Greg, the definition of civilian in Gaza is very, very blurry.
What do you make of the news that the Biden administration's now thinking about direct negotiations with just Hamas to get the Americans freed?
I hold in my hands a paper from Chancellor Hitler saying that peace in our time has been achieved. And I would point out, Kevin Williamson likes to point out that Neville Chamberlain actually was a lot better than that one really bad moment would indicate, and that once he realized he'd been had, he started up the buildup of the military over in Great Britain. Let's create a separate peace, right? Let's negotiate directly with Hamas. I can't wait to see what concessions Joe Biden. We already built them a pier. What else do they want? Okay, so the pier floated away, but still, that's kind of Hamas. I don't know if you're familiar. Kind of par for the course with government work, okay? I'm from the government and here to help. You should be as nervous as anybody else. You thought we were being tough and we were trying to hurt you. Wait till the U.S. government comes along and tries to help you. Then you're really in trouble.
All right, that was the good martini. Kind of ended on a bitter aftertaste, but I'll tell you what won't end on a bitter aftertaste, and that is Omaha Steaks. Father's Day is less than a week away. It's this coming Sunday. Your husband, your dad, your grandpa, they want Omaha Steaks. Sounds like over the weekend, you guys were enjoying Omaha Steaks a lot.
Listeners, there's kind of a continuing day-by-day or night-by-night adventure in the Garrity house. Will Jim get any food from Omaha Steaks, or will it all disappear by the time he gets to the dinner table? Because you may recall last week, they made the steak fries. There was a crumb. I'm trying to avoid carbs, and boy, is my family helping me out. Then earlier this weekend, the apple tarts, and it's got a little bit of everything, including the apple tarts for dessert. So it's not just like, oh, you got a grill. You want to have a dessert? They send that too. They take care of everything. Well, that disappeared before I could get any. Again, trying to avoid sugar, trying to avoid carbs. My family's so helpful. Finally, last night, we're cooking out on the grill and made the burgers. And I finally got to have some of the Omaha Steaks beef, fantastic, juicy beef burgers. They were terrific. You would never know this stuff comes shipped frozen. This tastes as good as stuff as you'll get from the grocery store or the butcher's place. Just terrific. And so I guess maybe this is the warning, is that Omaha Steaks will be so popular, your family will betray you and eat them before you can get to it. Use caution.
So, when it comes to this Father's Day or any time of the year, make new memories with loved ones and show Dad the love with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com to order the Father's Day gift packages starting at $89 with the code MARTINI. That's omahasteaks.com, code MARTINI. All right, Jim. While that daring raid was playing out over in the Middle East over the weekend, You had a bunch of lefties protesting in Washington, D.C., specifically at Lafayette Square, just across Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House. And in addition to their noxious chants, which are protected by the First Amendment, they were also very uncooperative and breaking the law in a number of different ways. There's video of them throwing things at National Park Service employees trying to stop them from vandalizing different monuments in Lafayette Square. They were pelted with things. The statues and monuments themselves, many of them were vandalized with graffiti and so forth. Jim, this administration, this D.C. government, which constantly tells us that no one's above the law, in round numbers, and I stress round, how many people do you think got arrested for the vandalism and the assault on the National Park Service employees?
Oh, Greg, that's cheating because I've already looked it up. But I will point out that if you don't see a great deal of coverage of all of the arrests and the DC police responding and the park police responding, it's federal property. You might have, first of all, it's near the White House. You might have Secret Service. You might have the FBI. These are federal crimes, defacing federal government property. The answer is zero, I happen to know, but I will point out, as my colleague Charlie Cook observed, he had to go looking to like the local NBC4 coverage. I don't think there was much of anything on the NBC News national news website. Don't think anything on CNN, New York Times. A big protest outside of the White House ends up with people spray painting the Lafayette statue and stuff like that. Yeah, just not news, local crime story. But I would say, actually, it's not even a local crime story because nobody got charged with anything.
And keep in mind, back in 2020, what was it? It was more than 50 Secret Service agents who were injured and needed some sort of medical attention during the George Floyd Antifa riots and so forth. I don't know how many people got charged with that. There may have been some. I certainly haven't heard any follow-up about that and jail time for them. So if it did happen, it was kept extraordinarily quiet. So this idea that things are all equal in this jurisdiction in particular, not even close.
It is infuriatingly nonsensical. And so I recently participated in a kind of a roundtable discussion with some other Washington Post columnists, and the topic was illegal immigration. And one of the questions is like, why does this come up? Usually a close second, sometimes a distant second in list of voter priorities in 2024. And I made a quick point about the sheer number of people coming over the border and stuff. But I also said, like, look, we know people break the laws on entering the country illegally all the time, right? In a lot of communities, you go to the Home Depot, you go to Lowe's, you go to any type of hardware store. There are guys sitting out front. They may be perfectly good guys. They are, they're hard workers, most people would tell you. But they're in the country illegally. It is not terribly hard to find an illegal immigrant in this country. You can even call up INS. You can call up, nobody's going to do anything about it. The attitude is, yeah, it's against the law, but we're really not going to enforce something like that. And you could contrast this with, say, the recent Trump trial. Now, I think everyone would say falsifying business records is bad. When it's outside the statute of limitations, I think we're like, a little less consequential. And I think you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to determine that if Donald Trump was not named Donald Trump and if Donald Trump was not running for president, the odds of him being charged at all, much less being charged with 31 felonies, with each check being treated as a separate felony, extremely unlikely. So we know we have two different terms. We know that if you are a protester on the right, if you break the law, the odds of law enforcement, coming down on you like a ton of bricks is likely. And as a general opponent of law breaking, I'm fine with that. But when the left-wing protesters go out and do the exact same thing and nobody gets arrested, and they're literally throwing water bottles and other cans, stuff like that at U.S. Park Police, hey, that's assault. What are you talking about? Why are we all ignoring that? Why are we acting like this is not a significant enough crime? If you're going to charge the January 6th protesters with assaulting a police officer and bring him to court and prove that, which, by the way, you should, because you know why? You shouldn't punch cops. You shouldn't throw stuff at cops either. It's not going to go well for you. But the idea that, these protesters get a pass, my understanding is also I saw a video, and I'm seeing this secondhand. I've not had a chance to verify, but somebody brought a head of Joe Biden and were acting like they had decapitated Joe Biden in front of the White House. Greg, what do you have to do to get the U.S. Secret Service to, because we hear people who make, by the way, you should not joke about killing the president. You should not joke about assassinations. Also, when you're in the TSA line, do not say hello to your friend Jack. And even if you are seated in seat C4 or your plane is departing from gate C4, hey, I got to get some C4 is not something you want to say when you're at the TSA line. They are obligated to take that stuff seriously. So, like, why is there this ludicrous double standard about protesters from the left versus protesters from the right? And let me put it this way. If it were politically advantageous to the Biden administration to arrest those folks, which, ironically, it might be. But if Biden, does anybody doubt that we'd be seeing that, they roll it in the SWAT teams, they'd be taking these guys down like Kojak, to do a very good dated reference?
Hey, any Telly Savalas reference is fine with me. Here is the even crazier part, potentially. Do you remember why Joe Biden allegedly ran for president in 2020? It was because he was fighting for the soul of America. He watched what happened at Charlottesville and the white supremacists chanting these horrible, horrible things. And they were chanting horrible, horrible things. Guess who was also chanting horrible, horrible things this weekend? And here is the response from Adrienne Elrod. She is a top surrogate for the Biden campaign. And she was talking with Jonathan Capehart on MSNBC. So, it was a really tough, hard-hitting interview. But he does ask her what she thinks about the protests. And here's what she says.
Thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters rallied outside the White House, urging the president to halt military aid to Israel and calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. How are these persistent protests weighing on the campaign?
Well, first of all, President Biden certainly, unlike President Trump, supports the freedom of speech and the freedom of expression. So obviously these protesters are exercising their right, and that is their right to do. That being said, we certainly understand that it's a challenge. President Biden is certainly fighting for every vote. He's not taking anything for granted. But look, this is the freedom that people have. Going back to the message of freedom, they have the right to protest. They have the right to speak their mind.
He's fighting way too hard for those votes. Jim, what do you make of this? I would say either double standards, hypocrisy. Well, when people on the far left do it, it's their right. But when it's other people that the left thinks they can brand as the right, even though in many cases they're actually not, the soul of America is at stake.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of things that have been bothersome. There are a lot of things that are bothersome about Joe Biden, but the entire impetus for his campaign, the entire philosophy, the entire justification of why this guy who looked like he had aged a decade in 2 years out of the spotlight was that he had to come back to save the soul of America. Boy, that's some arrogance right there. Here's one of the country's most notorious demagogues. Going to put you all back in chains is going to come back and unite us and going to, heal our troubled souls. But he did. That was the philosophy, and that was worked. And remember, it was because he was old-fashioned Scranton values. He was a throwback. He was a uniter, not a divider. He was, of course, none of that was true. I know the sharpest mind of his generation. And, we saw this guy during the Obama years. He was the wacky neighbor, right? He was the guy who, Obama would say, and this is why, the Affordable Care Act is the most important work in a generation. And Biden would burst through the door like the Kool-Aid man and say, this is a big effing deal. He would just, it was kind of this weird, wacky, there's a reason The Onion made us laugh hysterically when we talked about him, cleaning his Trans Am with his shirt off, right? We all have some nutty guy down the street who kind of reminds us of Joe Biden. Amiable enough, I guess, but, kind of a weirdo, kind of a blowhard. And that was sold to America as the avuncular ice cream eating grandfather. And lo and behold, look at where we are nearly 4 years later.
Well, he does eat ice cream. That part's legit. The rest of it, big time fraud. All right, brand new sponsor, Field of Greens. We did have them a while back, but we're thrilled to have them again because you need to eat your veggies. There's a number of different products that do this, but you got to pay close attention. A lot of them come from China or Mexico, and you're not really sure what the ingredients are. A lot of them boil the vegetables, which takes out a lot of the nutrients. Field of Greens is different. Field of Greens is now offering up to 15% off on your first order, plus you can get free rush shipping by using the promo code 3ML.
Field of Greens is so powerful that it promises that your next checkup, your doctor will notice your improved health or your money back guaranteed. Field of Greens is not just watered down extracts. Field of Greens is an organic superfood, and it's whole fruits and vegetables.
It's all farmed in the United States. There's no heavy metals, no pesticides, and it's flash frozen, not boiled, so it maintains nutrition. Don't look back and say, I should have paid attention to nutrition when I was younger. Field of Greens is a key to better health today and when it matters most. To start, Field of Greens will give you 15% off your first order, plus free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use the promo code 3ML. That's promo code 3ML to get 15% off and free shipping at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini, which is a little bit different than our usual fare. But hey, when one of the co-hosts is the author of Heavy Lifting, talking about the importance of getting married and raising your kids and basically growing up, still available, Amazon.com, I believe. Also, Jim's got a new book coming out, the latest in his Dangerous Click series, which we're going to have a special on next Tuesday. Dueling Six Demons is the forthcoming title. But this relates to young, secular, progressive people today. And the New York Times doing a story on it that Jim saw. It says, for young, secular, politically progressive men and women, having children has become something of an afterthought. Liberal conventional wisdom encourages people to spend their 20s on journeys of personal and professional self-discovery and self-fulfillment. Children are treated as a bonus round, something to get to only after completing a long list of accomplishments, getting a degree, forging a satisfying and well-established career, buying a house, cultivating the ideal romantic partnership. The standards of readiness for family are at once so high and so vague that it's hardly a surprise when people fail to reach them. Indeed, the data suggests that people are having children later than they used to and are having fewer than they'd like. For progressives, waiting to have children has also become a kind of ethical imperative. Gender equality and female empowerment demand that women's self-advancement not be sacrificed on the altar of motherhood. Securing female autonomy means that under no circumstances should a woman be rushed into a reproductive decision, whether by an eager partner or tone-deaf chatter about ticking biological clocks. Unreserved enthusiasm for having children can come across as essentially reactionary. And so it goes on and on to say that a lot of people in their late 30s and sometimes even later than that realize just how long they've waited. And then at that time, it becomes much more difficult to start that family that they always thought they'd have time to get to. And so in terms of this trend, I mean, it's been happening for a long time. We've seen it a lot with the millennials ever since time began. That's been kind of understood that when you're a relatively young adult, you need to start working on the next generation once you've found the proper spouse. So what do you make of this dawning realization so many years later that young lefties are not quite sure whether to have kids, and when they finally get around to maybe wanting them, it's often too late?
First of all, I was really glad to see this op-ed, and I was glad to see the authors say, hey, young progressives, parenthood is awesome, or parenthood is a good thing, and having another generation is a good thing, and family life is a good thing. You're not helping the cause by opting out of any of this, whether you're claiming, for climate change reasons I don't have kids, or whatever, for feminism reasons I don't have kids, or something like that. But this is not a perfect op-ed by any imagination. I would point out that human biology does not care if you think that the talk of a ticking biological clock is tone-deaf chatter. It doesn't care whether you think that's cool, the difficulties of having children advance as you get older. It's great that they're making technological breakthroughs, and I know some people who've had kids later in life, and that's great. Our second pregnancy was challenging, and it was one of the toughest things I ever went through in my life, and I would not wish that on anybody. So I don't know if it's necessarily... My wife was not that old, but they count from the birth date of the child, not the birthday of the mother. And it was referred to as a geriatric pregnancy. My wife is not thrilled at being referred to as a geriatric pregnancy at that, let's just say, mid-30s age. You say geriatric, you're picturing the Golden Girls. This is not this is not my wife's age at that time. I could see the generally conservative listeners of this podcast saying, oh, good. Young progressives aren't having kids. Young conservatives are. That's great. It means our kids will have kids. They won't, and we'll inherit the earth, and we will rule a generation from now. And if only things were that simple. But I would also point out, I don't like seeing young progressives being miserable and not being afraid to get married, being afraid to have kids, being afraid to step into what I would consider to be real adulthood. Look, one part of heavy lifting was getting a real job. I have no doubt that is often challenging. You and I have had careers we have enjoyed and prospered in, but has not been an easy path. And there's no doubt you got to put in long hours, and it's challenging. And I totally understand that sense of, oh God, are we ready for this? Oh God, are we going to be able to afford this? This terrifying sense of the people's hesitation about having kids sometimes is a healthy recognition of the degree of the responsibility. But I would also point out, pass along advice that came to me. There's never a perfect time. There's never a time where you're going to feel like, yes, everything in my life is going exactly the way I wanted to, and now is the time to, or by the time you do it, it will biologically be very challenging. Also, I don't know if I would say that having kids makes you conservative. I think you'd agree with me, Greg, that it definitely changes your perspective. It definitely gives you a longer timeline of thinking about things. You suddenly become very invested in how the world is going to be about 30 years from now on all kinds of different fronts, and what kind of a country your kids are going to inherit. All of a sudden, school choice is not this theoretical issue to you. All of a sudden, what's being taught in schools is not just a theoretical issue to you. Everybody who's a parent will probably tell you this is one of the most transformative experiences you'll go in your life. They'll probably also tell you it's one of the hardest things they've ever done in your life. I don't want to soft pedal it. I don't think anybody else does. Parenthood is a job. Parenthood is work. Parenthood is going to have some of the most challenging moments you're ever going to have in your life. But it's also going to give you most of the most fulfilling moments of your entire life. One of the reasons when Cam and I wrote Heavy Lifting, now coming up on 10 years ago, this recognition that extended adolescence looks fun, looks like a good time, but eventually you end up on a couch playing video games, unattached. I wouldn't even use the stereotype of living in your parents' basement or something, but it is putting off the things in life that are actually fulfilling. And the more you just try to live in this individualistic, I'm just living for myself, I'm just, you find yourself depressed. You find yourself wondering what the point is. And so for all those depressed young progressive people out there, I would say, go out and try to find that special someone. And if you're actually starting a family, if it seems frightening, you can handle it. You know why? Because your parents probably felt the same way, and their parents probably felt the same way. Nobody feels like they're perfectly ready to become a parent. And they get into it, and somehow, and the other thing is that, if you're like, well, I can't become a parent, I can't become, I'm too depressed. Look, the moment you become a parent, you no longer have time to be depressed. You no longer have time to be stressed out because you got a million things to do. You don't have the luxury of sitting in bed and feeling miserable because that kid needs to be fed, that kid needs to be clothed, you got to change that diaper. Somebody needs to take care of that kid. And the thing is, you suddenly will feel needed in a way like you've never felt needed before. Your life, you're getting out of bed that morning, absolutely makes a difference in somebody else's life. All of a sudden, you matter a lot to somebody. That's probably one of the best experiences you'll ever have. So this is my early Father's Day speech for everybody out there who's either a new father, going to be a father, freaked out by the possibility of being a father. Definitely one of the best experiences of my life, and I would recommend it to anybody, recognizing the responsibility. And I think there's something a little that this op-ed really should be a frightening thing to progressives, where they realize how much their young people don't have faith in the future and don't have faith in themselves to handle what could come down the road and make life really worth living.
And a lot of it, you're right, is this irrational fear of climate change and that their kids are going to inherit some world that's literally on fire. I would say that the more responsibility you take on in your life, the more you're probably going to get a little more conservative. I'm not saying it's going to change how you vote necessarily. If you are a progressive and you want the government to keep expanding and have all these programs, when you get old, somebody's going to have to pay for that. And so you might want to think about that. And finally, eventually you're going to get old. And when you do, you're going to want someone to be there with you, maybe to take you into their homes and certainly to help you navigate whatever the medical minefield is at that particular time in your particular condition. Because Benjamin Franklin was right. There are certainties in life. And one of them is that you're going to check out someday. And if you have to do it alone, that's going to be a real difficult stretch. And so you shouldn't just have kids to be there for you when your life's over, or to pay your bills through their taxes. It's going to be very rewarding, as Jim said, but just to put a couple things out there for you to think about as to whether or not having kids is a good idea.
Your comment there just made me think of two more weird things that happen when you become a parent. So first of all, your parents, who you thought knew nothing and were wrong about everything and, had no idea. Everything they knew was ludicrously outdated. All of a sudden, they seem really smart. All of a sudden, it's like, wait a second, how could you have been right about all this stuff, for so much of this stuff? And the second weird thing, and this is not necessarily an upside, just kind of an observation. There was a meme that summarized this very well, where they said, this is what my dad was growing up. And they did R. Lee Ermey from Full Metal Jacket, as a drill sergeant screaming at somebody's face. And they said, this is my dad now that he's a grandfather. And they put a picture of Mr. Rogers. Hello, boys and girls. How are you? Your parents, who you remember being just hard asses, just constantly riding you, suddenly are like, hey, kids, here's some presents. I'm Santa Claus. Everything is awesome. And on the one hand, it's wonderful to see your parents that way. On the other hand, you're thinking, where was this guy when I was growing up? This softy. But usually it's worthwhile.
But because they did raise us with some discipline, it put us in a better position to raise the kids. And as some grandparents I know have said, discipline, that's now your job. Our job is to have fun. So
our job is to undo all the discipline you're trying to teach.
no, they do.
Here's more presents, kids. Didn't get that from your tightwad parents, now did you? Remember who's your favorite?
Thanks to our parents for doing such a great job, and their awesome grandparents too. Jim, have a great day.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast and tell your friends to do it as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Monday. Join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.